Hi everyone, I'm Kalista, and right now, I'm relishing the single life. But there was a time when I was married to a man named Darius, and that marriage, along with his parents, Becket and Azra, made my life quite challenging. Despite both of us having good jobs and solid incomes, his parents always viewed me as someone looking to exploit their son. This misconception was largely perpetuated by Darius himself, who often bragged how lucky I was to marry to his affluent lifestyle, implying that I could never achieve such success on my own. This attitude only solidified his parents' view of me as a gold digger. Their belief that I was financially dependent on him led them to insist on a prenuptial agreement before our wedding. While I didn't fundamentally oppose the idea of a prenup, it hurt that Darius never even discussed it with me. He perpetuated the false narrative that I earned significantly less than him, further diminishing my value in the eyes of his family. To avoid embarrassing him, I chose not to correct the distorted image he was spreading, which only resulted in more judgment and unfair treatment from his parents. I stayed silent out of love for him, even as it became increasingly clear that he didn't reciprocate that love or respect. After he lost his job, he started living off my income while allowing his parents to believe it was the other way around. I grew weary of carrying both of us financially, and his unwillingness to look for a new job only compounded the frustration. The breaking point came when I decided to buy a house using my savings and some inheritance money. I found a place I adored and purchased it solely in my name, which Darius was not pleased about. This decision forced me to reassess my relationship and ultimately led me to realize that I needed to stand on my own 2 feet. I had to remind him that he hadn't contributed anything financially to the house, yet he continued to hassle me about it. One evening during a family dinner, everything was going smoothly until his parents began asking about the new house. They seemed genuinely curious, but it was clear they assumed he was the one who had financed it, given how little they thought I earned. We just moved in last week, and it's already furnished, so the transition went pretty smoothly, I said, hoping this would prompt Darius to finally set the record straight and acknowledge my purchase. Instead, he let them believe he had paid for the entire house with his financial success. His parents were ecstatic, showering him with praise while completely ignoring my role in the purchase. I looked at him, searching for any sign of acknowledgement, but he avoided eye contact. I was furious but managed to keep my composure in front of his parents. I didn't want to create a scene, but as soon as we were alone, I could no longer hold back. What was that about? Why would you tell your parents you bought the house all by yourself? I demanded, utterly shocked by the lie he had just spun. He attempted to defend himself, saying he didn't want to disappoint his parents by admitting he had lost his job. I just wanted to make them happy, he said. You could have simply told them we both contributed to buying the house, I argued, feeling crushed by the betrayal. His claim of sole ownership was a heavy blow to my pride, yet he dismissed my concerns, saying, "What's done is done," and insisted there was no point in correcting the misunderstanding. His refusal to tell his parents the truth revealed how much he prioritized his own pride over my dignity and our relationship. At that moment, it became painfully clear that he cared more about avoiding personal embarrassment than about me or the truth. He was perfectly content to let his parents believe he was the sole provider while I did all the work. His unwillingness to find a job and his constant nagging about putting his name on the house deed only deepened my frustration. I started to feel like I was being taken advantage of, but even then, I wasn't sure what to do next. That indecision lingered until the following day when something happened that pushed me over the edge. I heard the doorbell ring, and since I was busy, I asked Darius to answer it. When he opened the door, I couldn't believe my eyes. His parents were standing there with suitcases in hand, ready to move in. Somehow, thanks to Darius, they had gotten the impression that they were invited to live with us indefinitely. He welcomed them with open arms, playing the part of the generous son who had supposedly bought this big house and could now take care of his parents. They praised him endlessly, and he soaked it all in, leaving me speechless with anger and disbelief. My mind raced as I processed how far he had taken his lies. I had worked hard to buy that house, and now his parents were moving in, thinking it was all thanks to him. I reluctantly agreed to this arrangement, but the sheer audacity of it all made it clear that Darius had crossed a line with his deception. Even though I didn't want to cause a scene in front of his family, I felt a storm brewing inside me. Deep down, I knew there was no way I could let this situation continue. The thought of his parents living in my house based on a complete lie was simply unacceptable. In that moment, I realized I needed to take decisive action to reclaim not just my home, but also my dignity. Navigating this situation required a delicate balance. I didn't want to explode, but I knew I had to handle this unexpected turn of events with as much grace as possible. Meanwhile, Darius's parents were practically over the moon, excitedly discussing how spacious the house was. They rambled on about how cramped their previous home had been and how lucky they felt to be living in such luxury, thanks to Darius. Each word felt like salt in a wound, especially when they began talking about the 5 bedrooms and their eagerness to claim the largest one for themselves. Let's hold off on choosing rooms for a moment, I suggested, trying to keep my tone calm. I need to talk to Darius privately. Sensing the seriousness of the conversation that was about to unfold, he clearly wanted to avoid it. He glanced nervously at me but wouldn't meet my gaze. Instead, he tried to brush it off, suggesting we could discuss things in front of his parents. His attempt to deflect only intensified the discomfort in the room. "If you're fine with it, then we can talk here," I said, my patience wearing thin. I was done beating around the bush. "Your parents cannot stay here. It's not happening. You didn't even ask me before making such a decision. How could you think this was okay?" Before he could respond, his mother, Azra, jumped in to defend him. She acted as if the house was theirs to do with as they please, implying that I had no say in the matter. Her boldness stunned me. She even hinted that I should be careful not to get kicked out. It was as if she hadn't heard a word I said. Ezra's demand to see the largest bedroom, as if I didn't even exist, was the final straw. What had started as a misunderstanding had escalated into outright disrespect. It became clear that Darius's parents didn't view me as a partner in our life together. Instead, they saw me as an outsider in my own home. Their dismissive attitude, coupled with their willingness to let this happen, revealed a complete lack of respect for me and for the fundamental values of communication and mutual respect that should exist in any marriage. I stood my ground, refusing Azra's demand with a firmness that clearly surprised both her and Becket. As I stared at them, I couldn't help but reflect on who was truly at fault here. Yes, their sense of entitlement was outrageous, but it was Darius's lies that had set this all in motion. If it weren't for his false promises and the deceit he had woven, we wouldn't be in this predicament. Yet that didn't excuse Azra and Becket's behavior. They had brazenly walked into my home and even threatened my place in it, and I was not going to overlook that. Clearly caught off guard by my resistance, Azra and Becket tried to insist that Darius had promised them the largest room and that they were already planning to stay. In fact, they revealed that they had even ended the lease on their old home in anticipation of moving in with us. "You've made a big mistake," I said, striving to keep my voice steady. "There's no way you'll be staying here, especially under these circumstances." Their outrage was palpable. They insisted that my opinion didn't matter and that Darius would fix everything. Their confidence in his ability to get them what they wanted only highlighted the depth of this deception. "You're mistaken, Azra," I said, taking a deep breath. "It seems Darius hasn't told you the truth. The house is mine, not his, and you will not be staying here." Their disbelief was evident on their faces. They accused me of lying, asserting that there was no way the house could belong to me. I suggested they ask Darius for confirmation, hoping this would finally force him to come clean. Both Becket and Azra turned to him, expecting him to back up his lies. But as they waited for him to confirm their beliefs, it was clear he was cornered. He had to choose between maintaining the facade or admitting the truth. The tension in the room grew as he avoided eye contact, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. It was obvious he didn't want to confront the reality of the situation, but his silence spoke volumes. His refusal to meet his parents' gaze was a quiet confession that everything I had said was true. Finally, I offered to show the property documents to prove my ownership. "If you still don't believe me, I can show you the paperwork," I said firmly. The reality of the situation began to sink in for his parents, though they still struggled to accept it. For so long, they had believed the story he had spun, that I was financially dependent on him and that he was the successful provider. Now, faced with the truth, they were grappling with a reality they hadn't anticipated. As they sat there, refusing to speak up, the weight of his deception became undeniable. The longer he remained silent, the clearer it became to everyone that he had lied. The house was mine, and I wasn't about to let anyone, especially his parents, take that away from me. Becket and Azra were convinced that, given his previously high income, it only made sense for him to own the house. The stark reality of his job loss and dependence on my income was a shock they hadn't prepared for. I corrected them, pointing out that he had been out of work for over a year and that I had a successful career, despite their judgments based on surface-level assumptions. This revelation visibly stunned both Becket and Azra, leaving them speechless. Meanwhile, Darius remained silent, staring at the floor and avoiding any confrontation. His refusal to speak only heightened the tension hanging in the air. Seeing them all remain quiet, I decided it was time to end the awkwardness. I told Becket and Azra that they needed to leave. I had already endured enough disruption for one day. However, Darius finally found his voice, pleading with me not to throw them out. He explained that they had nowhere to go since they had already given up their previous living arrangement in anticipation of moving in with us. His plea put me in a difficult position. It wasn't just about enforcing boundaries anymore. It was about the real-life consequences of his lies, which had left his parents vulnerable. They had been caught in the web of deceit he had spun, and it didn't feel fair to them either. Still, I had to stand my ground. I can, and I will, I asserted, my voice leaving no room for argument. You made these promises without my input, offering them a place in my house as if it were yours to give. Just because you're my husband doesn't give you the right to decide this alone. He argued that his word alone should be enough to let his parents stay, trying to suggest that I had no choice in the matter. Azra chimed in, claiming that since we were married, everything I owned was now shared with them, as if our marriage erased my individual rights to the house. No, Azra, you're mistaken, I responded firmly. I absolutely can ask you to leave, and you'll be leaving with them. Since we're still legally tied, I'll prepare an eviction notice, and I won't stop there. I will also be seeing a lawyer to start the divorce process. The mention of divorce triggered an immediate and intense reaction from Darius. Panic mixed with anger washed over him, as if he had never imagined I might go this far. In his panic, he lashed out, threatening to take half the house and demand alimony, clearly hoping to scare me into submission. Really? I asked, unable to hide my frustration. Have you forgotten about the prenup you were so eager for me to sign? I reminded him of the agreement's conditions. Neither of us could claim alimony, and our individual assets, like my house, remained ours in the event of a divorce. The prenup, which he and his parents had pushed for, was designed to protect their future, never considering that the tables might turn one day. The reminder hit hard for Becket and Azra, who had been so confident in Darius's continued success. They were now realizing how deeply they had miscalculated. The gravity of the situation began to sink in, and their earlier confidence crumbled. Suddenly, their attitude shifted. Maybe we don't need to rush into a divorce, Azra suggested, her tone much more subdued. There was an air of desperation in her voice, a clear sign they understood just how bleak their circumstances had become. Let's just sit down and figure this out, they proposed, hoping we could come to some kind of mutual agreement. He clearly believed there was still a chance to salvage the situation if we could just talk it through, but I had reached my limit. I was done with the lies, the manipulation, and the way they had exploited my kindness. I'm not here to fix this for you, I replied, my voice steady. I won't be used for your financial gain, and I certainly won't tolerate any more exploitation from your parents after everything they've put me through. He tried to downplay his parents' behavior, brushing aside their actions as if they were insignificant, but it was too late for that. I had seen their true colors, and I refused to ignore how they had treated me in my own home. Their recent attempt to evict me was something I couldn't overlook, no matter how much they tried to act as if previous issues were minor and should be forgiven. Their sudden shift to kindness did nothing to alleviate the tension thickening the air. They began pleading for my understanding, hoping to sway me as they might have done in the past. What they failed to realize was that I had changed. I was no longer the person they could push around. The fact that they had canceled their lease, assuming they could simply move in with us, showed a complete lack of respect for my autonomy. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me any longer. As it became clear that Becket and Azra had no intention of leaving, I took decisive action. I called the police to have them escorted out. The departure left Darius fuming, but I quickly reminded him that he would soon face eviction from my home as well. Faced with the reality of his situation, his anger turned to apologies and regret. The rapid shift in his attitude was exhausting, but I felt a wave of relief wash over me, knowing that this nightmare was nearing its end. From that moment on, I made it clear that they were no longer welcome in my space. This was my final stand against the years of manipulation I had endured. Until his eviction was finalized, I relegated him to the guest room. He had to confront the fact that his time in the house was over. Meanwhile, his parents, who had depleted a good chunk of their savings staying at a hotel, were forced to search for a new rental. Interestingly, they chose not to take him with them when they found a place, seemingly attempting to hold him accountable for the mess his lies had caused. This created a noticeable rift between him and his parents as their relationship soared quickly. They began to blame each other for their predicament, and soon his parents withdrew their support altogether. It became clear that the only thing they had valued about him was his financial contribution, and now that he was unable to provide, they cut ties. Left on his own, he had no choice but to rely on the generosity of friends while searching for a job. As for me, I proceeded with the divorce. By that point, it was obvious that our marriage was beyond saving. His behavior had shown a deep lack of respect and an ingrained selfishness I could no longer tolerate. While he made attempts to reconcile, I stood firm in my decision. I wasn't going to be used anymore. The divorce process moved fairly quickly, largely because we didn't have children. Within 8 months, it was finalized and we were officially separated. During that time, I focused on rebuilding my life, finding my footing, and eventually even started dating again. Meanwhile, he continued to cling to the hope that we might get back together, but that was nothing more than a fantasy on his part. For me, the chapter with him was well and truly closed.